Hello and welcome to my channel. In today's video we're going to be doing a picture of a cow, and I've chosen this one. I've put the link in the description below for this picture of this cow, and you'll notice it's a very white cow, and it's often difficult to decide what colours we're doing when we're drawing a white object, particularly white animals, because really they're not white. They're absorbing colours from the surroundings, lots of reflections and shadows. And also with this particular cow, because she's had a haircut and it's summer, you can actually see her skin showing through. I don't know if it picks up to the camera there, but if you look at this photograph on your own computer, you'll see that here on the top you'll see quite a lot of pink showing through, and obviously we see pink around her eyes, her ears and mouth there as well. So an awful lot of white with that pink showing through. So we're going to have to have a little think about the colours that we're going to be using for those shadows, and to get the definition in a leg and things. We can see it's obviously quite a different tone behind a leg there, so if we look at that shadow we can imagine that the sun is around here somewhere, because she's also got a shadow under her chin there. So, and we also need to think about the landscape as well. A lot of lush greens with it being midsummer, so you know, you don't want to overdo it with make it too green and it detract from the cow. You want the cow to be the focus, so we perhaps need to make that a little bit more watery and subtle in the background with all these trees. I'm not really going to alter the composition much at all, but it's because it's quite a nice composition to begin with. Her head is more or less in the middle of the photograph, but towards the bottom third of the drawing, so that, sorry, the photograph, so it makes quite a nice composition. And because we've got this line of the hill going this way, then we've got another hill going that way, and then this hedge brings your eye back to the focal point of her face. So I think the main thing first is to draw the cow, and then we'll draw some very quick guidelines in the back for these shapes of the field and the trees. You don't necessarily need to put all these trees in. You could just have it as a hill in the background. You could alter that if you wanted to. I think I'll keep it as trees though. So if you look at the cow herself, we talked last week with the Aqualesia about breaking things down into simple shapes before you begin. So if you look at her, you could have really put more or less a square for that part of her. That's going to fit into a square. We've got a very triangular shape here with her neck, and then her head onto that. So think about doing a very basic shape here. Look how far down the page it comes. Like I said, that's about halfway down where her tummy's coming there, and it's more or less a square, so you know she's going to be sort of fitting into that shape there with her body. And then if we look at her neck and how far down it comes in comparison, it's actually, we'll do that measurement there. No, it's not as far down. It's about, let me just look from her nose to her shoulder there. Comes to about here somewhere is where it's setting off. So her actual neck is going to fit into that sort of area, and she's got that bit there going up, which is very distinctive on the cow. This is all going to be refined. We're just putting in some basic shapes of where she's actually going to fit in. Her head, quite long. Look at the length of her head in comparison to the length of her neck. It's very similar. That line of her head going across and down, and it's quite flattened off because of the way that she's actually eating the grass at the moment, so you're seeing the nose much flatter than you perhaps might otherwise. Okay, so that looks a little bit odd at the moment because we've got those geometric shapes, but that's going to make it a lot easier for you to fit the shape of the cow into. Okay, so I'll just pop that, I can leave it there actually, and I'll just carry on drawing this and filling it in. So if we look at a foot, it's about there, so just mark where the bottom of each foot is, and that's going to also help you. Think about where a shoulder is, and a knee. Look at a knee in comparison to a cheek, it's around there. And you're not actually seeing the bottom of her feet because they're in the grass, so she's looking quite stocky. Because we're not seeing the lowest part of her foot. Okay, so you can see the shape starting to come. So what I'll do now is I'll carry on with that drawing and I'll come back to you when we start and put some paint on. Okay, so I've gone quite heavy with my pencil so that it shows up to you. You'd obviously do it a lot lighter than that if you're going to be doing it in watercolour. Don't forget you can come back and erase them. Even after you've done your watercolour, you can come and erase your pencil lines. But I'm going to leave it like that so it shows up well to you. So now I'm going to look at the lines of the hill and very carefully put one line there for the top of that tree line. Then the next line's coming down here, slightly obscured by those trees, and then we've got the hedge coming along here just above her head, and you can actually see that hedge behind her here as well. And then we'll just put the tree in here, there's two trees together there, and if you just put a very light shape in, it's just going to help you when you come to putting your paints in, knowing where those shapes are. So again, we're going to keep the background very, very loose. Actually, I've gone over into the sky with the trees. I've made them much bigger than they are. I think I must be tired. I'm not observing very well. So they go up from this hedge point here. They start here. I'd put them on the next line up. It wouldn't actually have mattered. Nobody would know that those trees weren't there, but that's where they are, over that bit and not into the sky. Now the sky itself, I think we'll leave that quite a plain blue because we've got quite a lot of clouds on here, but that's sort of detracting from the cow really. So we'll try and keep that sky nice and simple. And that's enough for your drawing. You don't need to be putting loads of detail in your drawing when you've got a very, very simple composition like this, just of lots of different greens and things. So we'll do the whole of the background, the sky and all the greens before we even think about coming on to the cow. So at the moment, just leave the cow area, leave all that paper dry and work around it, setting off with the sky and working down. You'll notice I often start at the top and come down, and part of that reason is so that you're not putting your arm or risking touching your hand on a piece that you've already done. You can see there's a bit of blue there, I don't know where that's come from. So I'll go and get my watercolours now. I'll do a very plain sky and then mix some greens for coming forward down here. So I've begun by making a very light mixture of cobalt and cerulean. I quite like cobalt and cerulean mixed together. You might like to just use one or the other on their own with plenty of water. You don't want this sky to be too heavy. Like I say, it doesn't want to detract from the rest of the picture, which is the main focus. Plenty of water in there, but I'm also going to wet the sky area first as well. So this brush is a size 6 round. You might want to do something slightly bigger actually for this sky area. You don't want to be fiddling too much with small brushes. So the size of your brushes really depends on the detail that you're putting into your picture, but also the scale. This is just a small picture, as you can see. The pad's A4 and then I've got quite a big margin as well, so it's only a little picture. a small area of sky there. So have that evenly coated, and just give it a couple of seconds just to start and sink into the paper. And then load your brush up and give it a nice coverage all the way across. And it won't move out of that area onto the dry paper, it'll stay on that wet area there. If you wanted to do some clouds, it'd be very easy at this point to pick some out with your brush, just lift some out. But I'm actually just going to leave it nice and simple and keep it blue. A nice flat wash, just keeping your brush moving quite quickly across that paper. Okay, and that's enough. So while that's sinking in and drying, I'm going to make up some colours for the green. So I'll just turn my palette around. I hope you can see that. I'll just check in the camera. Yes, you can see that. And I'm going to make a few different greens up. Like I say, it's midsummer, so we've got plenty of yellow going on there. So I'm going to mix some raw sienna first of all, and I might even put that over the whole thing to begin with. Because I've used cobalt in the sky, I'm going to use a little bit of cobalt in my first green. Make this a little bit thicker than the sienna there, because I'm using the sienna more as a wash to begin with. And I'm going to add some sienna into that. Now, whether you use raw sienna or yellow ochre is entirely up to you. I just find the raw sienna is a little bit brighter. They're a very similar colour, but I just think it's a tiny bit brighter. So it's quite a nice dark green there for some of those shadows in the trees. Then I'm going to use a sap green. And I've said this before, when you use greens straight out of the pan, a shop bought green, they can be a little bit harsh and unrealistic. And what you can do to that is just add something from the opposite side of the colour wheel, which in this case is a red, and I'm just going to add a tiny touch of alizarin to that, and that makes all the difference to making it look a much more natural green. I'm going to make another one of the sap green. I do like to make my own greens, but I do find the sap green very, very handy when you're doing something quickly like this, just to add another colour to it. So in this case I'll add some of the raw sienna to that to brighten that up, because if we look at the picture we've got a lot of yellow in there because it's midsummer. So the sap green on its own is a bit too much, but add another colour to it and you can really alter it, and I think that's really quite nice. So I've probably not got enough made up there for the whole picture, but that's enough for us to get started with. I'm just going to put some extra water in this. And a bit more pigment. It's got a little bit of the green in it from that last mix, but that's okay because it's all going to end up quite green in any case. And I'm going to wet now the whole thing. In fact, I'll do it in segments. If you saw there, that went back into the sky a little bit there. You might like to tilt your board or work upright. It will stop this going back up into your sky. I'm doing it like this because it's much easier to video it like this. But when you're doing a landscape, if you have your board tilted, your colours will naturally come down, because you're going to naturally have more colour at the base anyway, because that's the foreground and that's where you're going to see more, and you want the background to be more hazy. So having it on a tilt or even on a board, a drawing board, and tilted up will you'll find that a much easier way to work. So if you have been used to working flat on the table and you've never used an easel, and you have the opportunity to use an easel and stand whilst you're working, I really would recommend it. For lots of reasons really. You're moving your whole body more, you can stand back more and look at what you're doing. I always work at an easel when I'm doing my own work. I usually have music on whilst I'm doing it, and I can sort of dance around a little bit, but the main thing with it is you're moving your arm more, your drawing isn't tight, your drawing's becoming loose, and you can keep standing back and looking at your progress and seeing what needs altering or what needs adding. So I'm just going to find something to prop this up a moment. Okay, so a tin of pencils would do. That'll just give us a tiny bit of a tilt. I lost my photograph under there. And hopefully you'll still see what I'm doing, but it'll just mean that that paint's not going back up into the sky. So we've wet all that, and now we're going to cover it all with the yellow. So this is raw sienna. You could use a yellow ochre if you wanted, but use one of the more natural ones. Don't use something like a cadmium. You want a much more earthy colour than that, because it's the earth that's showing through. And think of this as an undercoat that's going to shine through your other colours and give the whole thing a warm glow. It's going to make the whole painting very summery, having that yellow coming through your grasses and your trees. This is a £140 not pressed paper, which is a good one for beginners to practice on and learn on. I use a much heavier paper, and I generally like to work with a hot press paper that's very smooth for when I'm doing my drawing. But you need to try out different papers and get used to working with them all and see which ones you like the best. But to begin with, a not pressed is halfway between a hot pressed and a rough, so it's a good one, a good starting point, and nothing less than £140 with your paper, otherwise, in weight that is, otherwise you find that it tends to buckle quite a bit. Even at £140 it will buckle a lot more than the ones I use normally, which are £300. Okay, so if we look now, whilst that's still wet, and think about putting this row of trees at the back. We've actually got 2 rows of trees there, but I'm going to more or less make it all into one, that distant trees, and so do it while it's still wet to make them disappear into the background again, so that the cow is just the focus of the picture. So all of these colours that I've made up are just going to be mixed in here, and just be aware that there's those trees there, and we'll sort of gently go around them. And it doesn't matter if it goes into the sky a little bit there, because the trees on the top side there, and so there will be different shapes. Now the important thing is that these 3 mixes of green that I've made are thicker than the yellow that we've just put on. So let your brush sort of go up a little bit to make some tiny bits of tree shapes on the horizon like that. Don't make them too uniform, make some higher than others, and dot and dash a bit. Use the tip of your brush, you know, use the natural shape of your brush to do that. Make use of it. Let's try and keep this line quite straight here, because that's where it turns from tree into field. We'll probably do that next bit after this has dried. So with the next one, again, just imagine some tree shapes, dot and dash, but not uniform. Don't do them all the same all the way across the page. Leave gaps, do 2 or 3 together. And then this last colour, quite bright. There's actually some sun shining on the top there. Like I said, it's a very sunny day, and if you look carefully at this, you can see the sun shining on the top of some of these trees. So what I'm going to do now, while it's still very, very wet, and don't forget that's going to dry a lot lighter than it is now, I'm going to get some of that yellow on my brush. Not much water on my brush because I don't want to introduce any more water into that top area of the trees. I've just got the yellow on the tip of my brush there, and I'm just going to put a little bit of that sunshine on the top of one or two of those trees, very, very thickly. So all those are dots into that wet paint, and that's just giving the impression of those far away trees. Now I really want that to dry quite a bit before I go on with the next bit. So I think whilst that's drying, I'm going to come down and do the foreground field. I'll just try and get a bit of a better line on there. It wouldn't really normally matter if you were coming down to some more trees or something, but we're coming down to a very straight edge there, so we'll try and leave that like that. And we'll come down to the foreground field, and that's very bright green, so we'll go for this last one. Now whether you want to actually put the shapes of the grass in or not is entirely up to you, or whether you just want to do a flat green. To begin with, I'm going to do a flat green, and then we could always put some grass shapes on top of that. Perhaps from this point forward, where she's got her nose down eating, might look nice to have one or two grass shapes over the top once that's dry. And think about the shape of the lie of the land, which way the field's going. Move your arm, some nice big sweeping motions. Again, if you are at an easel, this is much, much easier to get movements like this in, because you can move from your shoulder. You have to work much more tightly when you're sat down. So it's a very nice sunny picture. And don't be frightened of using green. We worry that some greens look unnatural, but actually in the middle of summer, when the sun is shining on the grass, it does look very, very verdant. So, you know, you want to capture that feeling of it being midsummer. Now with a slightly darker one, you might want to make some of those lines of the lie of the land, so the field's sort of sweeping down towards the cow a little bit there, away from that hedge. It's slightly darker under the hedge again because of where the sun's coming from. So while it's wet, and that's getting a bit of variety into that field as well. It's just not making it look like one block of green. Again, if you wanted to, you could get some of the yellow straight from the pan on your brush and put a little bit of light here and there. You can see where there's some light on the top of some of those bits of grass. Just have a bit of a play with it, make some shapes. So whether you want to at this point put grass in or not, it's not going to go onto the wet paint there now, but you could take some out as well with do a bit of negative painting if you wanted to. But I think I'm going to leave it, and then we'll just put some in with some greens afterwards. So I think now we'll leave this to completely dry before we come back and do these trees and this field here. Okay, so that's not 100% dry, but it's dry enough not for the colours to mix together too much when we start to put these middle area in of these trees and this field. So you can see a lot of that started to dry off. It's just a little bit wet in these one or two areas. So we'll begin with these trees, and I've made a darker colour here out of some burnt umber and the cobalt blue, and I'm just going to pop in where the trunks are. And we can't see a lot of detail on those trunks or anything, we can just see that it's darker under there. So that's all it needs to be, is a little bit of dark just to show where they're at. There's going to be a lot of shadow under there as well in a moment. And then go with some of those darker greens underneath. in the summer you're going to get a lot of dark at the base of trees, particularly in midday, because the light can't get through those canopies. So you'll see how loosely I'm holding this brush and just thinking about some sort of imaginary, not imaginary, I've got a photograph in front of me, but you know what I mean, just very impressionistic tree shapes. The same three colours, I made up a bit extra whilst I was waiting for that to dry, so it's the same three colours, but the difference is I've made them a little bit stronger, just so that these trees are much nearer to us than those trees in the background. Looking a bit lollipoppy at the moment. So again, vary where you put your colour, don't be too uniform if you can help it. Mine maybe are a little bit too uniform. They come right down, you don't see much of the trunk at all. A little bit of that green in. And then again I'm going to get some yellow straight from the pan on the tip of my brush and put it at the top of the trees where that light is hitting. So where the light's hitting there, it's not white, it's yellow. The colour of the sun hitting the top there, catching the yellows out of the leaves because it's obviously quite young new growth. There's actually another hedge behind this foreground hedge, but what we're going to do at the minute is just pop that foreground hedge in, and I'm going to use my brush on its edge like this because the hedge is growing up, it's not growing that way. It'd be very tempting just to, you know, do lines like that, but let's just try and get a bit of variety, let some light come through the hedge, because the hedge is a living thing, it's not a solid wall. There will be some light coming through in places. We didn't do that bit yellow, did we, under there? That's hedge. Never mind. Put a bit of the green in, did more greeny green, if that makes sense. Again, allow the edge, the tip of your brush to make some shapes on its own really, that gives that impression of the top of the hedge. Which one haven't we used? The darker one. If you put some of the dark at the base, that's going to make some shadows. And because we've got that pencil tin there propping the paper up, it's going to come this way anyway, so the shadows are naturally going to come to the base of the hedge as that paint dries. But also this colour we made for the trunks is a lot thicker, so we can pop some of that into the base of the hedge. Just give us one or two shadows. Because it is very dark under there. And again, that adds to the feeling of it being midday and it being very, very bright and sunny. The two darker bits inside these canopies, because they are very dark. Like I said, because the light can't get through all those leaf canopies. Okay. So now we'll move on to this field, and it's more yellow than this, so we'll go over it again with the yellow. So that was more or less dry. We'll put the yellow on, and then we'll put one or two stripes of green in it. It's obviously been cut whereas this one hasn't. This is a pasture in the foreground, that's a meadow that's been cut and is regrowing. And then it's got the shadow on of the tree. So I'm going to get this colour and I'm going to add some extra water to it to make it quite pale grey. I'm going to put a tree shadow in here. And there's more shadows underneath. I'm not actually going to put all those in because it's quite nice, that little bit of light shining from the underneath of that tree. I'm also going to put some shadow in the base of these trees here. Just to give us the edge of that woodland and allow it to touch that field where it's wet and blend together a little bit. And similarly here. Okay, so if you look at the picture now, there's actually a tiny bit of fence here and some wall. So how much detail you go into when you get this reference photograph from the link below is really up to you. You could go, you could put all this tiny detail if you wanted to. There's another hedge behind there, some more bits of shrubs and things. So how much detail you go into is up to you. But I really think the focus should be on the cow in the foreground. So the foreground's still quite wet, so we'll not worry about that at the moment. We'll think about the cow. I'm going to start with some of those pinky bits. I'm going to use a very light mix of some alizarin crimson. I'm actually going to put a tiny bit of the yellow into that. This is the raw sienna. Because as we know, skin is more of a peachy colour than it is entirely pink. And you can always test your colours down your margin. And actually that's quite a good match. So I'm not going to wet the cow first. I'm just going to put her where I can see the pink more. I'm just going to put that on, and it actually follows a rib cage around because obviously the light is catching where her ribs are, so just putting that shape is going to help get the shape of her. On the back of the neck it's catching down here where the skin folding over. She's obviously an older cow because you can see she's got a lot more wrinkles around her neck, like we all have when we get a bit older, than a younger one would have. They've all got this very distinctive shape here, but as they're older it tends to be more obvious than when they're younger. And don't be worried when you first start putting these pinks in. It will dry lighter than it goes on, and if that's the colour that you're seeing as well, then that's the colour that you need to use. And it really is a good match, is this alizarin with that tiny touch of the yellow in it. She's also got a bit of a pink knee there. She's perhaps been kneeling down and got quite a bit of pink there. So at the moment that's where I'm seeing it. And use some of it to make the shapes of, like a tummy's going around in this direction, so get your brush going around in that direction, a shoulder's going over here. So that's all going to help build her shape up. Okay, so now I might put those little marks on. Sometimes I make up black myself, but I'm actually just going to use a Payne's Grey for these marks on her today. They look quite bluey. I always feel Payne's Grey is a little bit on the bluey side. And she looks a bit bluey, I think, because of the way the light's shining on those black bits. And also because there's so few black bits, it really wouldn't be worth starting making up loads and loads of paint. So we'll get the shape of her ear, because the tip of her ear is black. Use the end of your brush. She has a few little spots there. It's not just all uniform. Get that shape. The ears are quite round. and look carefully about how they're attached. So she's got some more darks in here, but that pink's still wet, so we'll leave that for now. We'll just put these spots on. She's got a few spots coming around her head here, but in general she's a very, very white cow. While we've got this on the brush, we may as well use it for her eye. And a nostril. We won't do a nostril just now because that pink's still very wet. In fact, the eyes run a little bit there, but we can sort that out in a minute. It's got one there. Well, it doesn't actually matter that you're putting the spots in exactly the right place, unless it's your cow. In this case, it is. But if it's, you know, nobody else is going to know that it doesn't have those spots in exactly that place. Okay. So this one's gone really horribly wrong. I shouldn't have put that there until that pink had dry. So I think what we'll do now is let this dry before we do anything else. Okay, so that's dry now, and I'm going to move on to a slightly smaller brush. And as I mentioned before, I am going to just put 1 or 2 little bits of grass in, just with a flick of the wrist. Again, don't make this too uniform. Do them all different, going in different directions. Don't want them looking like soldiers. And just put an impression of them here and there. You don't need to do the whole foreground with them. And that's probably enough of an area to be doing. You might want to do around her feet to give that impression that those feet are tucked into that grass. And you might want to get another couple of colours. That's quite a nice colour for some foreground bits of grass. You can put some lines in this direction as well if you want. Nice dry brush. Just give a bit of texture. Don't forget she's also casting shadows. So with this other green, I'm going to actually do that now. She's got a shadow for her head, underneath her and here. Again, you might want to put some yellow into that as well. And you'll probably do a tidier job than all that than I have. That was a bit of a rush job, but never mind. Now, we'll go back to the cow and I will mend that little spot that I made a mess of. So now that it's dry, I can put a bit of a crisper spot there. And we can go back to the ear and do that curly shape that goes inside the ear like that. And then we need more pink on the outside of that ear. I'm going to make a thicker mix of that pink because if you look around her eye and her ear is a little bit pinker than where it's just showing through the skin. So a thicker mix and get more of the shape of that ear coming into sort of a point there for where it's fastened onto her head. Get the shape of her eye more. White cows often have this very pink look around their eyes and it actually makes them look like they may be a bit pooly, but they're not. It's just their colouring. You know, they've not got much pigment there. You can actually see her tongue here. We've sort of lost a bit of detail there. I'm just going to reinforce that shape there as well. Okay, so that's enough probably for the pink. I'm now going to look at those darker shadows. And we need a nice grey for that. So if you're going to make the grey from the 3 primaries, so I'll just put a little bit of water there. We'll use the ones that we've already used. So the yellow we've already used is the raw sienna. The red that we've already used is the alizarin. So that's what we've got in there. And then if we add the blue of the cobalt, at the moment that's brown, which means we need more blue in it. So you, like I said before, you can make all your greys and browns from your 3 primaries and test them in the margin. And then I'm going to add a little bit more water to that, and actually I'd like it to be a bit more on the blue side. And that grey we can use for the shadows. So now we need to look where those shadows are. So they're behind her leg here. And like I said before, because of where the sun's coming up from over here, she's got a lot of shadow on this leg. She's just catching the light there. She's casting shadow on herself all down that side of her leg, and you'll be able to see that on the photograph very easily. And this is helping make her form. That little bit of tummy there's got a bit of shadow on it. And under here, and that's making that shape of the underneath side of her chin and neck. And then you can use that very lightly to get some of these shapes in of her wrinkles. Poor old thing, lots of wrinkles. So use it to draw as well as to do the shadows. She's got a shadow of her own ear, which is very distinct there. And she's got shadows on her bones, which are creating the shape of her face. So she's got a cheekbone there, which is going to be catching the shadow, and she's got another shadow there where her jaw comes to. If you look here, she's got a shadow all the way along there. That's because that's the bottom of a muscle. She's got another muscle that comes all the way around here. And this is where a shoulder comes around. Don't forget, this is going to dry a little bit lighter in a moment, and we'll go darker over here. And we may just put a little indication of one of those ribs down there, but we've already got that shape, and we don't want to cover up all this because most of that is white. Okay, so I'm going to make a thicker mix of this now. So same grey, thicker mix. You'll notice I'm now using a smaller brush as well. So just as you get to the end details, that's when you need to start and get your smallest brush out. Or smaller, should I say. I don't really use small brushes. I can't be doing with fiddling around. But yeah. And you can see it's much darker under there. Again, we've got that triangle shape of a tummy there. And under here. These are the darkest areas. So we need to keep them as the darkest areas, and that's really bringing her form out. And I think for actual detail on her, that's probably enough. But what I'm going to do now is leave that to dry, and I'm going to put a wash over it because, like I said earlier, things are very rarely white. And if we look at this, actually what I'm looking at now is we do need a shadow. We need a shadow. Just going to get a little bit of that on there. We need a shadow down this leg here to make the shape of her leg more. That isn't really white, it's absorbing the colours from around, and although it's not very yellow, I think that's what I'm going to do. I think I'm going to put some of the yellow over the top of that once it's dried. So I'm going to leave it to dry for now, and I'll come back and do that. now that's completely dry, we did have some yellow left from earlier. I'm going to add some extra water to it to make it a bit watery. And I will leave some parts of this cow white. Whoops. That obviously wasn't dry. Don't forget that this is going to dry a lot paler. So I'm going to cover the whole thing. You would make sure it was absolutely dry. I'm good at making mistakes like this. Oh, it's just the Payne's grey. Obviously it takes longer to dry than the other colours. I'll go around that one. So here I'm just going to leave 1 or 2 bits white. And I'm going to lift out where I've made that mess. I don't edit out when I make mistakes and I make messes because I think it's helpful for you to see how I rectify them. And it just seems to me like that Payne's grey. See, I don't use Payne's grey at all. I hardly ever use it, and I think it's like the blue is sort of coming out from that Payne's grey when I've gone over it with the second coat of yellow there. So I'm now going to look at where it's lightest and take some of that yellow off. Just going to keep the impression of it being a white animal. On her elbow there. We call this, it's not, you might think of the elbow as being here because that's where your elbow is, but we call that an elbow there. So you can see how easy it is to lift off as well when it's still wet. So basically I'm wetting my brush, getting the colour out of it, making sure it's dry on that tissue there, and then lifting out the colour. And that's keeping it as a white animal, just with those extra highlights. But having that yellow makes the whole thing, I think, a bit more natural. So we'll leave that to dry and then see what we think about that. Okay, that's completely dry, and I think this video has been an exercise for me, telling me why I really don't like Payne's grey and why I never use it. You'll have probably never seen me use it before. And you can see how much it's bled into the other colours and how blue it is, and that's what I don't like about it. And to me, I know I said, you know, her markings are quite blue because of the way the light's catching them. I really don't like it. I wouldn't use it again on this picture if I started it again in hindsight. I mean, those are the darkest areas, but it's looking a bit of a mess. I'll put it under there so that that's also dark. You know, that we're making it a bit more uniform. This line along here is very, very dark. So although I don't like it, I'm putting it there to match the whole thing up and make it look like it's all part of the same animal. So yeah, I've messed that up quite a bit, but like I said, I never take out all my mistakes because I feel you learn from them and you see how I mend the mistakes. And that's all going to help you. Again, I've not quite got the shadow dark enough behind the ear. You know, if you look at the photograph, that's very, very dark, that shadow there, because of it being midsummer. And it feels quite unnatural doing such heavy markings. Actually, we've missed a marking there. She's got a marking on the back of her neck. Doing such heavy markings on such a pale animal means that we've got a lot of hard edges. When I'm used to working very wet in wet and having things very soft, this is quite a hard drawing to do. Okay, so I hope you found that useful. I'm not 100% happy with it, as you can probably tell from the way I'm talking, but I think the basics are there, you know, the way to draw it. Set off with that box. We look at cows and you often think they're like, when you get the whole cow, you could more or less make it out of an oblong with the legs at the four corners, this shape for the neck, and the head is very distinctive. Two things that you want to really think about with the head that are very distinctive is this shape of the cheek. They've always got a nice round cheek there, and then this part of the lower jaw here is a very distinct shape, and the eye socket there when you're seeing it from the side on. Another thing about cows, like I mentioned earlier, they've got all this extra skin here when the neck's down like that, so that's something else to think about. So it's a good observation at looking at a cow. I'd be much happier drawing a black cow. It would be much easier, but now we've got to push ourselves now and again and try things that are different. Also, the scale of this cow, because she takes up so much of the picture, really makes this go into the background and seem further away. So I hope you found that useful. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Don't mention all the mess I've made, because I can see that for myself. But if you want to ask any more about drawing cows, or if there's another animal that you would like me to tackle for you, then please put that in the comments below. And I'll be back again soon with some more videos. Thanks for watching, and bye bye for now.